Donald Trump has signaled a new deadline for Canada. The newly sworn-in president says the harsh 25% tariffs on Canadian imports could come into effect as early as February 1st. That's left the federal government preparing their position and response. Earlier, I spoke to the Minister of Innovation, Science and Industry about his message to the United States. Minister François-Philippe Champagne, welcome back. Thanks for making the time.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure to be with you.
I'm going to have a few topics to go over with you today, but I want to start with Donald Trump because this tariff deadline now seems to be looming. February 1st is the date that he keeps mentioning. That's just under a week from now. How is Canada adjusting to that date and the reality that that might happen?
Well, our strategy has always been to prevent and prepare. So in terms of prevention, we looked at the executive order. As you know, there's been comments and there's executive orders.
Yeah.
The executive order talks about kind of a dialogue, a review to be taking place by a number of U.S. secretaries, which obviously would like to contribute. I heard the comments of the president yesterday at the World Economic Forum. And I think one part of the equation that I think we need to remind all our friends down south is that we happen to be their largest customer. We buy more from the United States than China, Japan, the UK, and France combined. So when he's talking about does he need Canada, the answer I would say if you say no to Canada, by implication, if you're talking about critical minerals, you're going to say yes to China. With respect to oil, that would mean to say yes to Venezuela. I don't think that's very attractive for the American people. And, when I was at the Capitol for the inauguration, I was seated with a number of governors, military leaders. And you know what? They understand better than anyone else because they're on the front line. And I said, there cannot be tariffs without consequences. There cannot be tariffs without impact. And there cannot be tariffs without additional costs for U.S. consumers. And I think that's kind of when he talks about different things with Canada, we have to listen to what he says, obviously, take that seriously. But at the same time, I just hope as Canadians that we're a bit more confident, that we have a strong position at the table. We have a lot to offer. I want an ambitious Canada, a strong Canada, a confident Canada. That's the position we have to lead in these negotiations.
But it is difficult, I would say, for the government, Minister, when the president points to different issues to justify the tariffs, depending on the day, the border, the trade deficit, NATO contributions. How can you possibly negotiate or respond with someone whose target is always moving?
Well, the first thing, we should not negotiate against ourselves. That's the first thing. You're quite right. We have to remember, and that was the starting point. He linked the border with the fact of tariffs. When he talked about that, and even more recently, I would say on the border we've done a great job. We've added $1 billion. We reminded them that when you talk about illegal crossing, it's less than 1% coming from the northern border. The same thing with fentanyl. There's less than 1% coming from the northern border. So those are facts. So we have to remind them of that, the work we've been doing. But also, what I want to say is that in a very turbulent world, when I was there at the Capitol, I think he talked about the golden age of America or the American economy. Well, you know what? I would say, Mr. President, if you want to achieve your vision, we stand ready to help because, to achieve your vision, you'll need energy from Canada. You'll need critical minerals from Canada. You'll need the supply chain from Canada. And you know what? If it's good for America, it should be good for Canada because we make things together. That's the difference, I guess, between Canada and other countries, that we don't sell to each other. We make things together. 50% of what we export to the United States comes from the United States. So, I agree with you. We need to do more. There's very few people waking up in the morning in Washington thinking about Canada. That's the other thing. So we need to double down our effort, engage in the process as long as there's dialogue and that we can make our point with governors, with senators, with mayors and stakeholders. That's a good position. But on the other end, Rosemary, let me say, we cannot react every single time that the president or someone in the administration would make a comment. We've been there before. I was there during the first Trump administration. Let's be steady. Let's be confident. Let's be serious. and let's make sure that we stand up for Canada at every step of the way. That's what we've done with Amazon, to give you an example.
Yeah, well, let me ask about Amazon. So just this week, Amazon said it was going to close 7 distribution centers in your home province in Quebec, with 1,700 jobs on the line. At least that was the first number. You told them that Canada would be reviewing its relationship with Amazon. Where is that at?
Well, I sent a very strong signal. My point is that we're not going to let Amazon do what they want without that being unanswered. We need to stand up for our workers. We need to stand up for our industry. Imagine, I had to call them, and they did not bother even to call the Premier of Quebec to let him know about the situation. And when we had a call, they were less than transparent with me. Not only did they not tell me the full story, I had to learn in the media that it was not a number around 1,700. But actually, after a call, someone released that they had an additional something like 1,900 employees. That's unacceptable. Canada is a G7 country. Treat our workers with respect. Treat Canada with respect, and treat our industry with respect. And I sent a letter to the CEO of Amazon, and I said, you know what, it's time for you. You still have time to reconsider. I'm happy to talk. Yeah. And you know what, just a few hours ago, we learned in the Wall Street Journal that suddenly they're willing to engage in a discussion with federal officials and provincial officials. For me, that's what we need to do. This is going to be, it's a different world. It's elbows up. You need to make sure that you fight at every step of the way. That's what I've done. That's what we'll continue doing.
Okay, I want to ask about the leadership race. We've heard lots of ministers and MPs give their endorsements. Where are you headed, Minister Champagne?
Well, I'll be endorsing Mark Carney. Mark and I have known each other for a long time, and we both share the same vision about a confident Canada, about a prosperous Canada, about an ambitious Canada. That's our mission, and I think that together we could be a really great economic team for the country. This is a moment where we need to restore confidence in our country. We need to attract investments like we've done before. We need to be there for businesses, for workers. And I think being together, it's kind of, we're joining force to help Canada at a very critical moment. Yeah. He brings the experience he had as a governor of the central bank. I bring my business background. I've been minister for almost a decade now. I think it's a great economic combination that we can bring and make sure that we fight for Canada. At the same time, I want to make sure that he understands the issue around Quebec. So a debate in French will be needed. Yeah. We need to talk about culture and art and the issues that are, center to the identity in Quebec. And make sure that Quebec interests are well represented, as well as other interests from other regions of the country. But I intend to play a big role and being a strong voice to defend the interests of Quebec in that leadership.
Mark Carney has an impressive resume for sure, but he's never been a politician. And not only is he running to be the leader of your party, he would be prime minister for as long or as short a time as that is. Do you think that he can really take on someone like Pierre Poilievre, who has been a politician, who knows how to campaign? Definitely. I think people want authenticity. People would say I'm a retail politician. I go and I meet with folks, and I think the best success in politics is to be humble and authentic. This is not a one-man show. This is about a team, a serious team, an economic team, which is, making sure that at a critical time for Canada, we're going to be there to defend. We both know how to negotiate. We've done that before. I think that we have the relationships that we need in the United States to make sure that we can make our case heard. And you've seen this week that we know how to stand up for Canadian industries and Canadian workers. Okay. Minister Champagne, always nice of you to make the time. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Just days into his second term, President Trump is taking aim at Canada again, both on the world stage and at home. Trump again suggesting he could hit Canada with 25% tariffs on February 1st and repeating his comments about becoming the 51st state.
They've been very nasty to us on trade. Historically, Canada has been very, very bad to us, very unfair to us on trade. So we'll see how it all works out.
So, I would love to see Canada be the 51st state.
Everett Eissenstat served as a White House economic advisor during Trump's first term, and I spoke to him a bit earlier this morning about the president's tariff threats and what this tells us about his negotiating strategy. Everett Eissenstat, nice to see you again.
Good morning. How are you this morning?
Well, we're still trying to figure things out, I think, in terms of what President Trump is going to do with Canada. As you know, by this time next week, we could be one day into a scenario of tariffs. When you and I last spoke, you talked about the threat of tariffs as a negotiating tactic for the president. At this stage, how are you interpreting what he is doing and what message he's trying to send to Canada?
Well, I think the key message is he wants to see some changes. And as we talked about, he initially talked about tariffs and viewed them as a negotiating tactic. I still think that's the case. I still think he sees this as a negotiating tactic. In fact, he said he wanted to accelerate the renegotiation of the USMCA. But he also talked since that time about tariffs both as a revenue measure and as a way to address the trade deficit. And so it was even beyond the initial pre-inauguration rationale that he put forth.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's kind of a moving target, which makes it hard for the Canadian government to respond. It had also been about the border. The Canadian government put more than $1 billion of additional investment at the border. Is it that there is just a lot of things that he wants from Canada? Like, do you get the impression that we could get to a point where he's satisfied with our response?
I think so, but it's going to take some time. This is not something that's going to be resolved in a matter of days or weeks. This is going to be a long-term discussion.
What do you think would happen if Canada did retaliate? There are, as you know, now conversations about a dollar-for-dollar retaliatory tariffs.
Well, I hope we don't get there, but if we do, the reality is that I think the president is determined to move forward with tariffs, and if the retaliation occurs, it's probably going to escalate. We saw in the case of China, when the negotiations didn't move forward the way he felt that they should, he increased tariffs, and China went tit for tat. They increased tariffs. And so at some point, with China, you just run, because the market disparity is so great, at some point they can't pace with tariffs. And you have to, the China or another party would have to retaliate with something beyond tariffs. Right. And I think that just leads in kind of a spiraling deterioration of the relationship, which would obviously be quite tragic for our relationship.
Yeah. One of the things that the Canadian government, the federal government, but also provincial governments are doing is to try and explain the impact of this on American consumers. Given that the president got elected, with a mandate to help Americans to deal with inflation, is that an argument that might hold some weight, or is that something that those around him might be saying to him?
Well, it's a great question, and it does hold some weight, probably more with private stakeholders than with the president. You need to remember that the president likes tariffs, and while some traditional economists and traditional diplomats don't like the word tariffs, they don't see tariffs as something to use to resolve many different problems. The president does, and in fact, if we ended up in a situation where we had reciprocal tariffs, that'd be fine. And if they stay in place, he's comfortable with that. He believes that it brings in revenue and it makes the American economy wealthier. So for him, the end state that we're talking about is quite different from the perspective, I think, of many in Canada and from the president. Yeah. If we end up in a tariff situation, that's not a bad outcome for him.
So what would you do then if you were Canada? What would be your approach then?
First off, I think it's important to keep in mind the fundamentals. And this is going to be a moving target, and the relationship's going to evolve just as it has for decades. So keeping the big picture in mind, keeping the fundamentals in mind, defining some clear objectives where we have shared values, and also trying to really address the other party, in this case, President Trump's concerns. And we know there's been some discussion about energy security and other things that I think may not necessarily be part of the USMCA negotiation in of itself, but certainly could be an ancillary sectoral agreements that could really bolster the relationship and lead to some long-term stability and prosperity for both of our economies.
The fact that the president continues to mention Canada, sometimes unprompted, sometimes when being asked a question about another country, he continues to talk about the 51st state and those kinds of things. What does that tell you about how he's approaching this? Is it an attempt to sort of needle people in Canada? Is it what is the strategy from your perspective from him?
Well, I do. It is part of a psychological tactic. I mean, he's talking to some other countries as well. Panama with the Panama Canal and Greenland. I know it's very disturbing in Canada to be talked about as a 51st state. It's just shocking. Mm-hmm. So part of it is tactical. The reality of that happening is obviously not going to happen. But it does create a dynamic of unease that could perhaps gain a value at the negotiating table, but I'm sure it's quite disturbing for many in Canada.
Yeah, I'll just end on this. There was also, as you said, that the idea that maybe he wanted to start the review of CUSMA, or the USMCA, as you call it, the free trade agreement, earlier. Is that something that you think maybe should happen if we're headed towards, potentially a trade war? Why not just put everything on the table and sort through the agreement again to see if it continues to make sense for the United States?
Absolutely. I would begin the process as soon as Canada can be ready, because we know it's going to occur. There's no point in waiting a couple of years for this to really be engaged. It's a chance to be one of the first movers, which is always a good place to be in a new administration, and really set the table on a lot of trade and economic matters that candidly will probably serve as a template for other economies. So just as Canada was the first mover many decades ago with our U.S.-Canada free trade agreement, and then the NAFTA, Canada, again, could be one of the first movers here to really change the paradigm, not just for Canada and the United States, but for many other economies as well. So I would encourage, a quick engagement. I think it's more productive than delay.
Okay. Everett Eissenstat, really smart thoughts. Thank you for them this morning.
Thank you, Rosemary. It's great to see you.